With Juan Gonzalez, we're speaking with chief reporter for The Guardian U.S., author of an explosive new report called Because Scott Walker Asked.
Well, at a press conference on Thursday, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker said he'll leave an investigation into the John Doe documents leak to legal authorities.
We've been scrutinized more than any elected official in America, and we've had several courts, not just one, including a local circuit court judge that was reserve judge, well-respected, just over in Eau Claire County, who, to my knowledge, is not aligned politically with anyone, has shut down this baseless investigation multiple times, and we've seen it through various courts. And what you have are people who failed to win in a court of law because their arguments were baseless when it comes to the law, now trying to selectively put out bits and pieces of information to try and win in the court of public opinion, but they're doing it without context. So we're going to abide by what was requested in the first place by the legal system, which was not to comment on those things until they're fully resolved. And there's still one more quest in terms of the U.S. Supreme Court that they're going to. We don't think it's likely they'll get traction there, but it is frustrating when it's been time and time shut down by the courts.
That was Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker speaking on Thursday. We're speaking here with the chief reporter for The Guardian, the U.S. author of a new explosive new report called Because Scott Walker Asked. Ed Pilkington, I want to ask you not only to respond to what Walker said, but also, if you could, one of the people you mentioned in your article was Harold Simmons and his company NL Industries. If you could talk about their role and what you found.
Yes, I mean, at the heart of most campaign finance law is the fear that unless you unless there is some degree of regulation, there could be quid pro quo, literally this for that, or you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And in the documents, there is some suggestion that at least even the appearance of quid pro quo could be there. And the Supreme Court of the United States has made it clear very many times that even appearance of quid pro quo must be avoided. Now, in the documents is evidence that Scott Walker, in his own recall election in 2012, went after and encouraged donations from Harold Simmons. He was a very wealthy billionaire right-wing funder. He bankrolled the Swift Boat smear campaign against John Kerry in the 2004 election. There is evidence of the Walker's campaign committee discussing the need to go after Harold Simmons, get money from him. And sure enough, 3 separate checks amounting to $750,000 did arrive in 2011 and 2012, exactly the same time of the recall elections. They went through a third-party dark money group called Wisconsin Club for Growth that did not disclose those donations. And in fact, the donations were never known until we received these leaked documents. At exactly the same time frame, the Republican-controlled legislature in Wisconsin made several attempts to change the law to make it almost impossible for victims of lead paint poisoning to sue for compensation if they were damaged by toxin.
His connection to lead paint?
Harold Simmons owned a company called NL Industries, historically National Lead Industries. They were one of the biggest manufacturers of lead paint until lead paint was banned in 1978. And if the law had not been stopped by the federal courts, as it was, the legal changes that the Republicans made in the legislature, it would have been virtually impossible for children damaged by lead paint. As you know, it affects the development of children. The level of toxin in their blood was something like 50 times greater than the water, those damaged by the water in Flint, Michigan. And the changes the Republicans made would have made it virtually impossible for those children to sue for compensation for the very serious injuries they received.
And so let's go back to the other people who contributed money. At the beginning of this report, in the last segment, we talked about the Koch brothers. We talked about Sheldon Adelson. Explain what happened. I mean, I think our listeners, viewers, readers remember well 2011 when protests rocked the Wisconsin Capitol, the uprising of 150,000 people at the state capitol as they took over the Capitol, occupied it. Police officers, firefighters, nurses, teachers, high school kids, environmentalists, union activists all slept at the Capitol night after night. Talk about what happened next with this recall campaign and the money that Walker was appealing for.
Right, you described well the scenes that happened then, and extraordinary events, very, very dramatic. Even the Democratic senators fled to Illinois, if you remember, for several days, and we all remember those heady events. Scott Walker put a bomb under Wisconsin in Act 10, and it turned it, as I said earlier, into the sort of ground zero of partisan politics in the country. And in the fallout from that, he and his 6 of his senator colleagues from the Republican Party were put through recall elections. At that point, it kind of went dark for the public of Wisconsin, and they couldn't follow what happened next, which was that Scott Walker's campaign committee got together major fundraisers, political organizers, and they started fanning out across the country. Literally, Scott Walker himself made several trips down to Texas to call on oil money. He went over to New York. He did a journey, one memorable day down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, where he went to spend 45 minutes with Donald Trump, and he went to Morgan Stanley and a big law firm. And in every occasion, you see him going to visit these major billionaire donors, and a few days or weeks later, checks starting to arrive, not to his own campaign committee, but largely to the coffers of this third-party group, Wisconsin Club for Growth. And I should say, if people are interested enough in what is a fiendishly complicated world, I have to warn you, of campaign finance in America, which is, I think, part of the problem. They can themselves go in and read all of these documents. We have lightly redacted them for personal information, but otherwise they're on our website. You can go in and you can absolutely make your own conclusions from this, and you may think it's great, you may think it's awful, but you can do it for yourself.
You mentioned Donald Trump, whose campaign contributions are coming back to haunt him, several of them in this campaign. What specifically happened with Trump?
Specifically, Scott Walker went across to New York in early, I think it was 2012. He did this tour down Fifth Avenue. The documents show a sort of calendar of his day. We have no transcript of the discussion between them, but he did spend 45 minutes. It was in his schedule with Donald Trump in his Fifth Avenue headquarters. On that very same day, Donald Trump wrote a check for $15,000. We have the check from the documents. They are among the documents you can see in the database. And, you know, in the subject line, it was made out to Wisconsin Club for Growth.
I want to turn to a clip from the first Republican presidential debate held in August of last year. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker was a candidate at the time, and he participated in the debate. This is a moderator, Brett Baer of Fox News, questioning Donald Trump.
Mr. Trump, it's not just your past support for single-payer health care. You've also supported a host of other liberal policies. You've also donated to several Democratic candidates, Hillary Clinton included, Nancy Pelosi. You explained away those donations, saying you did that to get business-related favors. And you said recently, quote, "When you give, they do whatever the hell you want them to do."
You better believe it.
So what specifically did they do?
If I ask them, if I need them, you know, most of the people on this stage I've given to, just so you understand. A lot of money.
Not me.
Not me. But you're welcome to give me a check, Donald, if you'd like.
Many of them.
Actually, to be clear,
That's
he
right.
supported Charlie Crist.
Not Mike.
Hey, Charlie,
but I have.
Donald, if you end your campaign, I hope you will give to me.
Good.
Okay.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me, Governor. I will tell you that our system is broken. I give to many people. Before 2 months ago, I was a businessman. I give to everybody. When they call, I give. And you know what? When I need something from them 2 years later, 3 years later, I call them. They are there for me.
So
and that's a broken system.
That was Donald Trump at the Fox News Republican primary debate. Documents leaked in the John Doe investigation show Trump did give at least to one of the candidates on that stage, Scott Walker. And as we've mentioned, on April 3rd, 2012, he wrote a check for $15,000, not to Walker's campaign fund, but to the Wisconsin Club for Growth. Ed Pilkington, this is business as usual at this stage in American politics.
Yes, I mean, it underlines what an extraordinary presidential election we're going through. On the one hand, you had Bernie Sanders. On the other hand, you had Donald Trump, two complete opposites politically, saying exactly the same thing, that the political system is broken, that billionaires and corporations have politicians in their pocket. In the case of Donald Trump, he said it personally. He had politicians in his own pocket. And I think that speaks to something that is of increasing concern to voters and explains the anger that voters have, that they feel their vote counts less than the money that is being contributed to politicians.
I wanted to go back to 2011. A blogger named Ian Murphy revealed he'd impersonated David Koch in a recorded phone conversation with an unsuspecting Governor Walker. Murphy said he pulled the prank after learning that Walker was refusing to return phone calls from Democratic senators. During the 20-minute conversation, Governor Walker admitted he'd considered disrupting opposition to his anti-union bill by planting troublemakers among the protesters. This clip begins with the blogger Ian Murphy impersonating David Koch.
We'll back you any way we can. But what we were thinking about the crowds was planting some troublemakers.
You know, the only problem with because we thought about that. The problem with, or my only gut reaction to that would be, right now, and the lawmakers I've talked to have just completely had it with them. The public is not really fond of this.
Well, at the time of the call, the Public Campaign Action Fund was saying Governor Walker may have violated a law that forbids politicians from coordinating with political donors. The prank phone call ended with the David Koch impersonator inviting Governor Walker to visit him in California.
Well, I'll tell you what, Scott. Once you crush these bastards, I'll fly you out to Cali and really show you a good time.
All right, that would be outstanding. Thanks for all the support and helping us move the cause forward, and we appreciate it. We're doing it the just and right thing for the right reasons, and it's all about getting our freedoms back.
Absolutely, and we have a little bit of vested interest as well.
Well, that's just it. The bottom line is we're gonna get the world moving here because it's the right thing to do.
That's Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker in 2011, speaking last year with a man he thought was Republican funder, the billionaire Republican funder David Koch, one of his supporters, but in fact, it was an impersonator. The governor's office had confirmed the authenticity of the recording. We're talking to Ed Pilkington, who is the chief reporter for The Guardian U.S., and we're going to link to his piece because Scott Walker asked. We're also joined in Madison by John Nichols, political writer for The Nation. John, what's the response to this explosive Guardian report?
It's been big news in Wisconsin. Front page of the newspapers, on radio. It's funny, as I was driving to the studio this morning, it was the lead story on public radio. And so this is being discussed a great deal. But I would suggest that Wisconsin is like the rest of the country in this regard. And it is a challenging situation because the lines have been drawn so hard and so deeply that instead of what you would have seen maybe 20, 30 years ago when you had a revelation of this sort, where everybody's shocked and horrified and says, well, we got to do something about this, you have Democratic legislators calling for investigations. You have public interest groups calling for investigations. You have Republican legislators kind of jumping into process and saying, well, how did what's the Guardian got here? How did this happen? And one thing to remember is that the John Doe investigations, a couple of them have been going on for a long time in Wisconsin. There have been a lot of leaks. Clearly, what the Guardian has now is the biggest leak and the most detailed one. But there have been a lot over the years. And so I think that you're seeing individuals and groups kind of go to their camp, go to their side, and fight this out. And remember that Governor Walker has survived revelations of this sort before. And weirdly enough, that's where you begin to see the intersect. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign said back in 2012, or revealed back in 2012, when it analyzed all the money that the governor had, as well as many of the groups that helped him in that campaign or that were sympathetic to him in that recall campaign, that he had roughly, in the final fight there, a 2-to-1 advantage financially. He literally was able to overwhelm the process with money. And at the heart of this, we now know more about where the money came from and how it was raised. But the reality of the money is still there, that great mass of money. And so in Wisconsin, one of the real challenges now is this question. In a state that is essentially under one-party rule, where you have now evidence of a governor flying around the country collecting money from billionaires and corporate interests to protect himself. You have evidence of his legislative allies literally acting in the way that those interests and those allies would prefer. And then you have a court, a state Supreme Court, on which people who clearly should have recused themselves from these cases are not only voting on these cases, but actually writing decisions. I think an awfully lot of Wisconsinites are horrified, but also uncertain about how this thing gets fixed in this state. And so I think that's why there's an awful lot of interest in the U.S. Supreme Court examination of these issues.
Well, John, precisely I was going to ask you about that. The prosecutors who were denied the chance to go forward with this case have appealed. And what's your sense of whether the Supreme Court will take the case up, and also what the results could be given the current composition of the court?
Well, the court is missing a member, so you've got a closer split on it than you historically have. And you should always be careful about trying to read the minds of members of the U.S. Supreme Court. However, one thing that's interesting here, and I don't think it's discussed enough, when the United States Supreme Court did the Citizens United ruling, which I've been very, very critical of for a long time. In fact, Bob McChesney and I wrote a book about it called Dollarocracy, where we examine a lot of these issues. One of the interesting things in the Citizens United ruling is that the court said that transparency, knowing how the money is raised and who's raising it and who it's coming from, was a vital part of guarding against the legitimate concerns of citizens about corruption and about the danger of allowing corporations and wealthy individuals to be so dominant in our politics. So this court, even conservative members of it, have acknowledged the necessity of transparency, of knowing what's going on, and obviously of maintaining campaign finance laws that were on the books, that are in many cases still on the books. So one would hope that the United States Supreme Court would recognize the need to step in on this, if only to clarify their own statements of the past about the absolute necessity of transparency.
Well, we want to thank you both for being with us. John Nichols, political writer for The Nation. Ed Pilkington, chief reporter for The Guardian U.S., author of the explosive new report called Because Scott Walker Asked. And you can go to the documents right at his site, and we'll link to it at democracynow.org. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, John. This is Democracy Now!